What's up, guys? Some really exciting news as I got to interview former pitcher and current radio host and Braves broadcaster CJ Nikowski. We dive into absolutely everything from his career to his broadcasting career and some other really fun tidbits. But I hope you guys enjoy. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and as always, go Braves, champions forever. CJ is amazing.
Your career is one of those that was a page turner when I started to uh, dive deep into it. And the most interesting thing was you were never steady in your career. How did you deal with that? Was it easy? Obviously, it wasn't easy, but how did you deal with it?
It definitely wasn't easy. I think over time, and as I got near the end of my career, and certainly now into this one, I have a greater appreciation for it. And I probably should have known from the very first year of my career that that's what the next 18 years were going to be like. Because my first full year, I played in four different cities for two different organizations. And that doesn't happen too often, especially if you're a first round draft pick and a high first round draft pick. Teams usually bring you along a little bit slowly. Maybe you go from A ball potentially to double A. But I went double A, triple A, big leagues, back to triple A, and then traded to another organization from Cincinnati to Detroit. So that very first full year was such a whirlwind. They all ended up kind of being like that. But I'm grateful for how long it lasted. It was all said and done. It was 19 years that I spent pitching professionally. It was tough on my family at times, but we're also extremely grateful as we look back now for the different opportunities that we had. To be in Detroit for parts of 5 years over two different stints was kind of the most steady that we had. And other than that, everything was kind of a year or less than a year a lot of the times. And then when you start having a family, that can be a real drag and it becomes extremely important. And I say a drag, meaning just tough on them because there's not a lot of stability. But that's when you realize how important it is having a spouse that's completely on board, that you have to be incredibly selfish as a player. To ask her to do the things that are not easy to do, and there's nothing traditional about the lifestyle, right? We see now people maybe on social media, on TV, and like, oh, it must be amazing to be a player's wife. Well, yeah, if you're a great player and you're making a lot of money all the time, it is probably great, but it is tough for the rest of us. But my wife did an unbelievable job. We have great appreciation for what the journey was after. And now that I'm a broadcaster, maybe even more so, because I realize the value in it and what I learned from all the different coaches and teammates that I had over the years. And my first job well, I said my first job, but I had worked for Fox and a bunch of other people. But when I first started with the Rangers, after I had gotten to year three and into year four, it officially became the longest tenure job I'd ever had. The longest I had gone was just under 3 seasons with the Detroit Tigers. So once I started getting to 3 and 4 and then eventually stayed there for 7, that kind of stability was completely foreign to us. And we were very appreciative of it.
Um, you said so many coaches and so many teammates. I think you mentioned one time on one of the broadcasts you had maybe over 40 managers. How do you take what you're supposed to from a manager, but you're obviously not going to like every person you work with? So how did you balance that?
Yeah, 40 on the nose when I went back and counted after I was done. And you're right. I mean, there was guys that are near the top of that list, and there were some that, my experience wasn't great, or I just didn't think they were, good managers. It didn't work. You have to learn to deal with it. I mean, that's the reality of life. We don't get to choose our boss. We don't get to really choose our coworkers. And so the idea of how you make that work, I think is really important. It's a really great life lesson that over time you figure it out. You may not notice it in the moment. You may not have been appreciative of the experience at the time if you have one that goes bad, but then you start to realize, like everything else in retrospect, what did I learn there, good, bad, or indifferent, that if I'm ever in any kind of leadership role, what would I want to do different? That matters. And then you also get a greater appreciation when you really get the good ones. And I've told people this long before I ever worked for the Braves on the broadcasting side that, of those 40, Bobby Cox was right there in those top two or three. And I played for a handful of Hall of Fame managers, and he certainly was one of the best. And so there was a lot to learn from him. And again, you're grateful for it. At the end of the day, would I like to have played for one organization and maybe two or three managers over a pretty consistent 10 or 15-year career? Yeah, that would have been great, but that's not what God chose for me. And again, I never get upset about it. I just look at it and say, okay, yeah, I learned some different things here. And at times it could be difficult anytime you go into a new situation, I don't care what you're doing in life, you always want to impress everybody, and you kind of want to get everybody to like you and to be accepted. And so all those different times that I would walk into a new clubhouse or spring training with a new manager, he was always at the very top of the list of the person that I was hoping I was making a good impression on, but I always didn't do it. And so there were certainly some challenges there as well.
If you didn't make that good impression, did that always affect your role?
100%, especially once I got into the bullpen. Once I realized I wasn't going to be a starter anymore and became a reliever, you have to pretty quickly, especially if you join a team in the middle of the season, which I did a couple of times, and it's a new manager, have to earn his trust quickly. And if you don't, it's difficult to change his mind, especially when you're playing on a really competitive team. I ran into that in my last stint with the Washington Nationals. I just really got off to a bad start and just could not convince Frank Robinson that I could be a go-to trusted guy. And that's a tough thing to have to deal with. Especially, again, I walked into a brand new situation, not knowing anybody in that particular situation. So that presented a real challenge. I would think the opposite of that, what we saw with the Braves this year, I brought it up, a handful of times on the broadcast, was Grant Holmes. How quickly Grant Holmes earned the trust of Brian Snicker and how important that was. And then what that meant down the stretch when he was getting some really big opportunities in crucial situations. Like there's a really good example of what it looks like when you get the trust as a new guy of your big league manager and when he needs you. And of course, as that I experienced many times, the opposite could be true as well.
This is maybe kind of off the wall kind of question, but your career expanded continents in Japan and Korea. Do you count your entire career because you stopped at 397 strikeouts in MLB? Does that irk you at all?
Not at all. Not at all. I guess here at the end of the day, I think for a lot of people, you have to, I think when it comes to a professional career, look yourself in the mirror and say, did I do everything I possibly could? Did I show up every day? Did I prepare? And I had so many chances. Some guys will talk about maybe not getting opportunities. I had so many opportunities. So there's no regret. I try not to have regret at all. Could I have done things maybe a little bit differently at different times? Absolutely. Of course, I could have. But I know that I was showing up. I know I was always putting my work in. I probably struggled more with the mental game than the physical part of it and trying to find consistency. So no, I mean, listen, I don't really enjoy looking at my baseball reference page. It gives me some agita, as we like to say. But the reality is I'm also proud of the fact that I was able to play as long as I did and to continue to find ways to continue to chase the dream. Japan and Korea were a tremendous experience for me that I still draw upon, to see the game on the other side of the world. And I would say the same thing about winter ball as well and playing in the Dominican Republic. I didn't do that until I was 38 and 39 years old. And it was a tremendous experience to learn the game from that part of the world and all the spots that I had, but in particular from the DR, just seeing where guys that I played with from those countries or from that country, I should say, for so many years to see what their life was like, to see what winter ball was like, what it meant to them. I was really fortunate. Marcel was actually a teammate of mine in the Dominican. He was a young baby and nobody knew who he was yet. And he was our center fielder when I was playing for the Gigantes in the DR. And I
Oh
was like,
God,
dang. And
center fielder?
I was like, yeah, believe that. And I was like, who's this guy? Like he was lighting winter ball on fire that year. And again, he had not been in the big leagues yet. We talked about it a little bit. I'm not sure he really remembers. It was so long ago. But I remember his name. And I remember saying, man, this guy is pretty good. Gene Segura was on that team. And I don't think had been a big leaguer yet. So it was cool to see how that kind of played out. Why do you hang on as long as you do sometimes? And for me now in this job, I'm glad I did because there was a couple of guys at the very end of my career that I got to play with who either still playing or using Matt Tuiasosopo as an example. I played with him my very last year. So to have him as a former teammate now be the Braves third base coach, Colin McHugh, of course, who works with us on the TV side. Zach Wheeler was on that team, that very last one that I played in AAA. So I'm glad I pushed as long as I could until finally the phone wouldn't ring anymore. So I really try to look at it as having no regrets.
You even tried to go the Darren O'Day route with the sidearm.
I did. That was something I always wanted to try. And quite honestly, going to Asia put that on hold. I likely would have tried it earlier in my career, but because I went over to Asia and they weren't looking at me as a sidearmer, they wanted me to stay in my traditional arm slot. And that was 4 years of my career. And so I had to push the idea of trying sidearm back a little bit. And then I had an arm injury. And I was able to get it out of my system, which was nice. Went down to the Dominican, eventually signed and pitched in the minor leagues with the Mets as a sidearmer and had a completely different perspective at that point because I was so much older. And it was fun to try it. I think if I had started a little bit earlier, I think I might have had a chance to get some big league appearances as a side armor. But Father Time, like he often does, finally caught up with me.
Um, since you had so many different experiences in international ball in Korea and Japan, were those do you think if you would have gone over there earlier, there would have been a different path for your career, or did you do it at the right time in your mind?
It's a good question. I think any time to go over there would have been a good time. I think for me, I had spent the previous full season in the minor leagues, and I hadn't had too many seasons in my career where I'd only been in the minor leagues the entire season. I was always getting at least some look at the big league level, and so I figured maybe maybe I was near the end, and so I went over to Japan in 2007. That was my age 34 season. That was probably a good time for me to go. There was something about just kind of getting that break from the grind of trying to get back to the major leagues that suited me. I think we see more and more players now go over younger and then have the opportunity to come back, and they learn something when they're over there. There's a pretty consistent flow of guys now that have done that. When I went to Japan in 2007, it was really looked at as kind of the final stop of your career. Guys who would go over to try to extend their careers, see if you can make a little bit of money, and then teams were not really interested in the States and you coming back. That started to change with guys like Kobe Lewis and Gabe Kapler did it and some others. And then, like I said, now there's been a lot of guys like Miles Michaelis and a lot of others that have done it, have been really successful coming back. Obviously, our own guy and Pierce Johnson did it. It was a really good kind of boost and a break for him. A lot of guys have different experiences, but no, I'm glad I went when I did. I never believe it didn't happen the way it was supposed to happen. And what was nice about it going over then in my mid 30s was that I have 3 children, but 2 of them were alive and went over there with us and got to experience it and went to school over there and have great memories from it. So I wouldn't take that away for anything.
So it kind of just calmed everything down. I know it's still the grind of baseball, but what were the stark differences between international ball versus MLB?
There definitely are some big ones, and there certainly were back then. What it does is what guys will tell you that it takes a little bit of the pressure off because you're getting a guaranteed contract, you're making some pretty good money. And so it does kind of take some of that pressure off if you had been an up and down guy or just having a hard time getting yourself established at the big leagues with any consistency. Nick Martinez, by the way, another really good example of a guy who used Asia to really figure it out and has been so much better since he's come back now with the Reds. But there are a lot of differences. The game style, even between Japan and Korea, are significantly different. Japan is much more of a contact game. Fundamentals are stressed. Practices are really long. The amount of time that they put into actually practicing is something that would make eyes pop out of heads here in the States. How long spring training days could be, batting practice every day, full infield every day, those kinds of things that we don't do here. But at the same time, they were pretty good about the foreigners and understanding that we weren't used to that, and so they'd be taking a little bit easier on us. Going over to Korea was a little bit more of an aggressive style of play. There was a little bit more power. In general, the players were a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger. But it was great. Both experiences were really good. Coaching styles were different. I had some very aggressive and hard coaches, quite honestly, that were tough on the foreign players because the expectations were really high. As a foreign player, there's limited roster spots. And so you go over there, you can't even just kind of be good. Like they expect you to be great. The expectations are probably a little bit too high and unfair. At least they were when I was there. I was fortunate in Japan to play for Sadaharu Oh. Sadaharu Oh is, by some standards, one of the greatest baseball players to ever live with his 868 home runs that he hit in his career. He was an absolute legend. He was tough to play for. He was hard on me. He was a gentleman, and he was great about making sure that we were comfortable and enjoying the transition to Japan, but he put very high expectations on all his players. But for the foreigners, we were feeling a little bit of extra pressure there. And so there were some challenges. They did a really good job of magnifying every mistake that you made and maybe not giving you the credit when things were going well, which is not a great way to go about things from a sports psychology standpoint. So there were some challenges there on the mental side. But again, I wouldn't change it for anything.
Do you have top moments as a player in your career that you just hang your hat on and you're like, everything I went through, every little adversity I went through was worth it?
It was all worth it. I would say this. It's funny. I think my kids, my oldest now is 25, my youngest 16. I joke around with them. I'll send them a little clip every once in a while. And I ran across something for my first win in 1995 and sent it to the kids. And actually, finally, for the first time in a long time, like, oh, that's kind of cool, Dad. I feel like more often than not, they kind of joke around with me and maybe don't get as excited or think I'm as cool as I think I am. But getting my first ever win and looking at that today, I was 22 years old. The girl that I was dating, who is now my wife, was only in college still. She was a junior in college. It would have been my senior year in college. I was fortunate to get to the major leagues really quickly. The game was on ESPN, and Chris Berman called it with Buck Martinez as I was going back and listening, which I thought was kind of cool now. And I see Buck all the time as a Toronto Blue Jays broadcaster, and we have a good relationship. And so that's kind of neat doing those kinds of things. And we won the game 1-0. And pitching against Kurt Schilling, who was on the other side, and the Phillies, who had the best record in baseball at the time. Like that's a fun moment for me to remember. There's other little ones here and there, whether it's just certain players that you face along the way, especially once I got into the bullpen, Hall of Famers that you strike out, picking up your first save. I had a couple of saves in the big leagues too, which was pretty neat. So, there's a lot of fun little moments. I'm one of those guys, though, in general, that I don't reflect on my career a lot. I love what I do now, and that's kind of where all my energy is. And I got some really good advice from Al Michaels. One time he was on my radio show, and I love talking to the legends in the game, especially the broadcasters. And I was asking him about analysts. And one of the things that I'd asked him, I said, tell me about the best analysts you've had. What's made them the best analysts? And the thing that he said was that always sticks out to me. He said, the best ones that I've ever had that have sat next to me are the ones that are willing to put their playing careers behind them and their broadcast career in front of them. And I'm one of those guys. And I know some guys have a hard time letting go of their careers, and nothing wrong with reminiscing, but sometimes maybe hanging on a little too much. Perhaps because I had a very average at best or below average career, even though it was long, it's very easy for me to forget it and kind of move on. So I don't dwell on it, but at times I do try to draw on if I think it's going to help a broadcast. But I get more focused on where the game is today, that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about those 19 years, which obviously was a big part of my life.
I guess I should sort of thank you for starting the content creating, because do I have this right? You you had a blog during some parts of your MLB career where you would answer fans' questions and things of that nature before blogging and content creating was cool. So did that make your broadcasting transition easier, or did you feel like a rookie again in transitioning to broadcasting and everything that you do now?
So certainly you should always be learning, I think, in anything that you're doing. And so in broadcasting, for me, absolutely, it helped, but also by no means that I think I had anything figured out. And there's still things that will happen along the way that I always feel like I can improve upon, or maybe you learn something along the way. But it did help. I jokingly talk about, I've said it before, that I invented the blog. I didn't, but I think I was one of the first to do it. Going back to 1997, I was actually playing in AAA for the Houston Astros at the time, and I was in New Orleans. And back then, there was no MLB.com. And each website, and teams were just kind of getting websites, they were all individually run. So they all look different. Right now, you go to Padres.com, Braves.com, Yankees.com. They all pretty much look the same, right? The format's the same. They're all run by MLB.com. Well, that didn't exist at this time. And so the guys that were running the Astros website back in 1997 had asked me, hey, if you make the team, they asked me in spring training, if you make the team, would you be interested in writing for us? They didn't really know the word blog, but asked me if I'd be interested in it. I said, sure, it sounds kind of neat. And I ended up not making the team. And they said, hey, what do you think about even doing it from AAA? And I remember thinking, nobody's going to want to interact with a AAA baseball player. And again, none of this existed. So it almost sounds silly, but none of it was available. Obviously, there was no social media. And so I said, sure, I'll do it. And so I wrote a letter, essentially what we called a newsletter at the time, every couple of weeks from AAA. They just opened up the new ballpark in New Orleans. There's no AAA team there anymore, unfortunately, but it was kind of a nice time to be there. And so I did it. And the email list grew to about 10,000 people. And I started getting interactions, and people would send me notes. The first one I ever did, I actually sent out my personal email address. And I got a note from a guy, and he said, hey, man, you might want to think about coming up with a second email address. I'm not sure you'd want everybody to have your kind of go-to personal email address. And I was like, well, who cares about your email address? Like, it's not like it is today. And he was right, and started getting a bunch of emails from people. And so I quickly created a separate one and ended up using that going forward. But a light bulb kind of went off for me because, again, this was the first time that I think fans had access directly to a professional player kind of whenever they wanted, but they always had to wait on the newsletter every couple of weeks. And that's when I decided, I was like, well, maybe I'll try to start a website. And again, sounds like a pretty common thing today. It was not back then. And so I started a website that had little sections where I take pictures from behind the scenes, talk about road trips, and then the next year I was in the big leagues in Houston and had this big old huge digital camera that a floppy disk actually went inside of, like physically went inside of it, and would take pictures and share these really terribly graded movies and different kind of pictures. And I saw that there was a thirst there for fans, regardless of who you were and what level of player you were, just to have a little bit of a peek behind the curtain and how things worked. And so I ended up just kind of continually doing that. It was good to have because I've never been a good English student, never was a good writer, but it was a great way to practice getting your thoughts down on paper. And it's what I tell aspiring broadcasters all the time when they ask me questions about this business is that you need to write a blog, even if nobody reads it, podcast, even if nobody's listening to it. It's just a great way to figure out how to get those thoughts in your brain, out of your brain, and whether it's through your mouth or through your pen or through your keyboard. You can then start kind of practicing how you want your audience to receive what ideas and thoughts that you have. So it did help me from that standpoint for sure. I got myself in trouble a couple of times because there was no filter. I'm very grateful there was no social media when I was playing. If something was bothering me, I would write about it. Not always a good idea to do that as a player, as we see a lot of times on social media. But yeah, it was an interesting journey and one that I wasn't looking for that just kind of fell into my lap.
But then you created everything that you have now from that, which is insane to me. As a broadcaster, does it feel the same? I know you didn't get a chance to have a World Series ring, but you do have one from broadcasting with the Rangers. Does it feel the same? Do you feel the same energy, pride, whatever, when the Rangers win that ring? Like when the Braves won in 2021 for me, it felt, obviously I'm a fan, but it felt extra something.
It was really great to be a part of it. Certainly not the same as a player. Very kind of organizations to give broadcasters rings. It's nice to have one. I joke around about having a World Series ring that I don't deserve, but I'm not above it either because there was a couple of different times where I'd played for teams that went to the postseason that I thought there'd be a chance they'd win a World Series. I didn't participate in the postseason because I didn't pitch very well, but I was on the 2004 New York Yankees. Actually split that year between the Braves and the Yankees, so I figured I had two shots at getting a World Series ring. And of course, that was the year that the Yankees blew a 3-0 lead to the Boston Red Sox. They probably go on to win that World Series same way that the Boston Red Sox did against the St. Louis Cardinals. And so that would have been another ring that I could have gotten that I didn't deserve. Or if the Braves won in 2004, and I also played on the Reds in 1995, they were a postseason team. And then the Houston Astros in 98, we had won more than 100 games, but didn't advance very far in the postseason. So this was the first one that I received. It was very nice of the organization to do it. It's not quite the same. I have some fun with it. I joke around with my kids about it. And again, I have three of them. So I said it was ever the nicest to me over the next 10 years. I'll make sure that they have that ring in my will. But it's a neat thing to have. But I don't, at the same time, if organizations didn't give them the broadcasters, I would understand it. I'm kind of like one of these like small Hall of Fame guys and small group of people that really contribute to what happens on the field. So it is fun to have. It was more fun to watch it, quite honestly. And for anybody that knew kind of the history between the Texas Rangers and the Houston Astros and how tough it had been on Rangers fans the entire time that I was there. I mean, there was no running from it. The Astros just absolutely owned the Texas Rangers. That American League Championship Series in 23 was incredible. That felt like the World Series, quite honestly, especially after being down 3-2 and then going back to Houston. And somehow they pulled it off, and it was amazing. So it was fun to watch it because when you're a home broadcaster, you pull so hard for these guys. People ask me about when I went from national to local, what's the biggest difference? And I would say that's the biggest difference is how quickly you are emotionally involved in what's happening on the field and how hard you're pulling for those players. You are a diehard fan. Even though I was with the Rangers all those years, I've been living in Atlanta forever, and so always pulled for the Braves. But it went to another level when you become part of the organization and you have a vested interest in them winning. So it's fun to do, but you're just like a diehard fan who's got a great seat and a fun job. So you're all the way in, and the emotions are there for sure. And so it's kind of neat to have a ring, and I'm banking on at least a couple of more here in Atlanta.
I hope so. How do you keep those emotions? Okay, because I don't keep my emotions in check very well. I try. I've gotten better at it, but how do you keep those emotions in check being a local and you're diehardly invested, but you still have to be partial or impartial when good things happen for the other team, even though you don't want them to happen. How do you balance that?
Yeah, I think we find out how good of liars we really are because, of course, yes, you want to be a professional broadcaster. I do think when you're doing a local broadcast, though, it's okay to try to reflect, and you're honest, you don't want to fake it. But when you are reflecting the feelings of the fans who are feeling the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not calling the game where Brandon, of course, is doing the play-by-play, so I usually get an extra, few seconds to digest my emotion. So whether it's, pounding your fist on the desk or just kind of showing a facial expression that you're upset about whatever just happened on the field. Those can be tough, but you never want it to really come across. I think the idea of your voice or your tone sounding disappointed in something that happened on the field, you have to be careful with because you don't want to make players mad or the families mad that are watching games. Some of the best advice I'd gotten from my wife when I started broadcasting, and she said, "Hey, don't forget when you're on the road in particular, is that's when wives are watching the game the most, right? My wife has been around baseball for a long time. And of course, she remembers home games. She was there, road games more often than not. She was watching on television. And she's like, those are the moments that I would get annoyed with the broadcasters. The way that they would talk about if whether it was you or a teammate having a bad day. She's like, those are the ones that I remember. So make sure that you're nice to the players, even if things aren't going their way when the team is on the road. So it was really good advice that certainly helps. But you can't help sometimes but get wrapped up in the emotion. It's just a matter of, especially on the negative side, how you handle it. My thing is that I always, you want to keep your dignity intact and you want people to know that you're honest. At the same time, I think there's no need to point out what is a very obvious mistake, right? We know that something happens. A ground ball goes through one of the infielder's legs. We all saw it. I don't have to hammer that guy and say bad things or act like I can't believe he didn't catch it. One of the things that I have listed when I talk about broadcasting that I try to remind myself of is don't forget how hard the game is to play. Mistakes happen. A lot of mistakes happen. I made a lot of those mistakes as a player. So I have a lot of empathy too when things go wrong. So I'm not going to beat our guys up too much. We love the other side of it when things go well because you do get excited. And then you got to be careful about keeping your emotions in check a little bit too because you don't necessarily want to be screaming and yelling over the broadcast. You want to make sure you're helping your play-by-play guy deliver a really good call.
As 2024 kept going on, the expectations for the Braves were obviously skyrocketed because the success we've had, but the countless injuries, does your perspective shift when things start going a different direction than expected on the field, or do you just keep it the same? Do you keep the same feeling every single game?
So for me, I always remain optimistic and understanding again how difficult the game can be, how quickly things can turn, is that I'll always believe the team that I'm calling games for is going to have a chance until they get eliminated. Now, obviously, it took 162 games last year to get it done, and it was deflating at times, and understandably so for Braves fans that they were deflated when it seemed like one injury and big time injuries of big time players after another kept happening. And you're like, you got to be kidding me. But with some of those injuries, created great opportunities too. And so I talked about it a couple of different times on the broadcast because everybody that works on the broadcast, they're Braves fans. They're pulling hard. And I could sense the tone sometimes as we got later in the year when some of the things were going wrong. You could even feel it from the production team. Like they're discouraged, whether it's a bad loss or an injury. And so almost I could feel like sometimes I'm talking to them as much as I am talking to all of our fans as something is going on the field. And I remember one time talking about, listen, this has been brutal. This has been tough. But at the end of the day, this team is going to make it to the postseason, and this reward is going to feel even greater because of how hard it was to get here, because of everything that was thrown at them. And at one point, I remember our producer Gretchen getting in my ear, and she goes, "Oh, I like that. That's probably a good way to look at it, right?" So for me, it was always about remaining optimistic, and always will be that guy because it's fun going to work every day. And while we all want to win, it's still baseball. So let's make sure we're having fun. Let's make sure we're staying optimistic. But last year at times certainly could be challenging. And I think I noticed a difference from those that were around the team in 23, where it was such an incredible season, especially offensively, to watch what that team could do night in and night out. And all of a sudden it's not happening in 2024. And there was some discouragement there. So I always try to keep people encouraged and saying, listen, they'll get through this. This is a good team. And there were some good things that came out of it, like what we saw with Spencer Schwellenbach. Because of injuries to Spencer Strider and some guys struggling, he got the opportunity and he ran with it.
the chemistry between you and Brandon happened, in my estimation, really quickly. Was it as easy a transition as it seemed like?
It was for the most part. It's interesting because I worked with a lot of different people over the years, especially when I was at Fox, when I was doing national games for Fox. I had a new play-by-play partner, what felt like almost every week. So I quickly learned how to adapt to other styles. Now, there was definitely some times and things that we talked about during the year, and I was making sure and trying to make the adjustments that they were looking for, which I think we did. But the first part of it, when you talk about chemistry, is I think you need and I don't say this as any way to try to brag or anything like that, but I think you need some good people. You need some good people that don't have egos to make it work, especially when you're talking about a new partnership. And this is a really important broadcast that they have in Atlanta. So we did the couple of games in spring training, 4 of them, and those were very important just to kind of feel each other out because we didn't know each other at all prior. I got to Texas. I knew my play-by-play partner before I stepped in that booth. We had done some other work before, but Brandon and I went in brand new and we were quickly having some fun. And I made sure he understood from the very beginning. I said, "Listen, man, I'm here to do a good job. I'm going to be prepared, but also, I want to have fun, and you can have fun at my expense. And I promise you, you're never going to hurt my feelings." And I like it that way. I have a little fun with my career and what it was, and I wanted him to be okay doing that. And I said, and also, listen, I make a mistake, correct me on air. It's okay. You're not going to hurt my feelings. There may be some broadcasters that don't like that. They feel like they're getting corrected. I'm all about let's make sure we get it right. So let's have some fun. Let's make sure we get it right. Took a couple of games, but right away, quite honestly, even that first series in Philly, I was like, "Oh, this is going to be great." I mean, I love Brandon. He is great at his job. He does an excellent job setting up his color analysts really, really well. And he's not afraid to say some things. Not afraid to take some chances on some jokes, which I love. So, even though I'm a little bit older than he is, there are things that where we have similar senses of humor, coming from the Seinfeld generation a little bit, making those kind of jokes here and there, those kind of references. It's fun. And as fun as it is, I almost have as much fun when he or I get something wrong and then we're correcting each other on it because I think those are really fun moments as well. And we let everybody know we don't know everything. We're going to make mistakes every once in a while, and it's okay because we're human beings.
Is it easy for you to be as interactive with fans as it seems? Like, because you're the most personable, one of the most personable broadcasters I've ever come across. And do you, is that something you prided yourself in from the beginning, or was this something you had to work up towards?
It's not intentional. Like, it's not like, hey, I need to be this kind of person. I enjoy social media. I enjoy interacting with fans, going back to what I did all the way in 1997 and kind of feeling my way on the internet for the first time as a professional athlete. Again, I realize how fortunate I am to have this job, and I want to be able to share it and any insight that I have with fans. This fan base is incredible. It's really big. And they love their Braves. And they were so nice to me from the beginning. And so I appreciated that so much because it's not fun being the new guy. And it's not fun sometimes listening to the new guy, right? Everyone's kind of got to get to know each other, just like Brandon and I were getting to know each other. I would say it's the same thing with the fan base. And you're hoping, just like I said, all those years of having a new manager and going to new teams and hoping you can make an impression and hoping that people like you, times that by 100 when you're a broadcaster becomes even more important, in my opinion. So I feel like if someone's going to take the time to send me a message or a notification on social media, that I owe it to them to reply. And I feel like even though this got much bigger than I expected, I felt like I stayed on top of it for the most part. I also I tell people all the time I'm pretty quick to I never block people unless it's something like really concerning and nervous. But other than that, but I will mute people. And so like I try to keep all the negativity out of my notifications as much as possible because there's so many great fans and I don't want to miss anybody. And I get it. Not everyone's going to like you and not everybody is going to enjoy listening to you, and that's okay. Nobody has a 100% approval rating in our industry. I think even the best of the best have their critics. But I try to kind of mute those people or put them off to the side because I do want to interact with those that want to talk Braves baseball, that are passionate about the team. There's an unbelievable, and yourself included in this group of both bloggers and those that do video in this fan base. It's incredible to me. It blows me away how many diehard fans that know this team so well, that know the game really well, are out there putting content on the internet. So I like kind of interacting with that group as well. But it wasn't a game plan. It wasn't a strategy. It's just kind of who I am naturally.
Well, you were incredible at what you do. And also you got a acting part in 42. How did that come about?
Got really, really lucky, right place at the right time. Back in 2012, when I was recovering from an injury, I was coaching my oldest son's team, and one of his teammates, his mom, had a younger son who was playing on a team who had also had a player who was his mom. Long story and weird to get there. Was part of the casting group for the movie 42, and they were looking for former baseball players to come help out with the shooting up in Chattanooga, shooting of the movie 42. And that's kind of how it started. They just wanted me to be a background player. I was the only actual former big leaguer that was in the movie. Pete Smith, who used to pitch for the Braves, was behind the scenes and helping out with the baseball scenes, but I was the only guy that played in the major leagues and was also in this movie. And so it started out that they wanted me in the background, and then they said, "Hey, you know what? We actually want you to read for a role." And long story short, I was sitting in the same seat that I'm sitting in right now, where I found out that I had a role in the movie 42, which is pretty cool, playing a pitcher, Dutch Leonard, for the Phillies at the time, who didn't appreciate that Jackie Robinson was there. That part maybe wasn't as fun, but it was so cool to be behind the scenes to see how a movie was made. Harrison Ford was on set when I was there. Chadwick Boseman, who played Jackie Robinson, who unfortunately has since passed away. I was just right place at the right time, and it was unbelievably fun to be a part of it.
Did you get any autographs or?
I did not. I mean, Harrison Ford wouldn't even look me in the eye. And I remember thinking, man, I waited online to watch Star Wars as a kid, but they were pretty serious about what they do. And so I understood that. So I didn't bother anybody from that standpoint.
I know I keep going around and around, but your career is such a page turner, like I mentioned. John Sterling, he just retired. And I don't know how long you worked with him. Was there a piece of advice or something that you garnered from him that maybe some other broadcaster wouldn't have given to you?
So he was great. I actually filled in. Those were the first major league games I ever did. Were New York Yankee games on radio. I did 3 games filling in for Susan Waldman, and he's a legend. And he was there obviously when I played there a little bit in 2004. I'd always see him here and there, and I'm going to miss seeing him around. But he was incredible to me. I got more advice going into doing those games with John from guys like Michael Kay that were more like, "Hey, heads up, this is what he likes, this is what he doesn't like." Which was very helpful. But my one John Sterling story is, I mean, I was super nervous doing games, and I was doing them on radio, and again had zero experience. And we had a commercial break, and I ran to use the restroom. And these commercial breaks are like 2 minutes. I was probably in the restroom for at least 30, 40 seconds, and then all of a sudden John walks in. And he was like, "Hey, CJ," he's like, I might be a little bit. He's like, "Do me a favor. Can you take us back from break?" I kind of could figure out what that meant, but I didn't even know how it worked. And so I was so incredibly nervous after he told me that. So I go back in the booth and I'm just praying that he is going to get back there before we get back from break. And luckily he walked in with like 3 seconds to go, and I didn't have to take us back from break. Now it's something I feel like I could do with my eyes closed. But at the time, he made me incredibly nervous, but he was very kind. He and Howie Rose, who do, of course, the New York Mets, I worked with him as well. He was very complimentary and helpful, and little tidbits here and there about repetition and certain things to look out for. Radio is different than when you're doing television games. They're completely different animals, but both of those guys were extremely helpful, and I was grateful that I got to be able to work with them and a lot of other legends over the years.
I'm going to spin it back to the Braves. And obviously, Chris Sale won the Cy Young last night, thankfully, because people said it was closer than everybody thought, and I thought that was dumb. But the idea that Chris Sale does not shake off catchers, did you ever try that? Or
I probably should have. It was one of the most amazing things. I know I've said it a lot that we've learned about him this year, but what it does, it really does speak to his personality and the way that he looks at pitching. And I really admire it. And I think it's something that others could learn from, because especially now, right, we have so much data, so much information that we're thinking a lot about these game plans, maybe more than ever. And it's always been something that's gone on in the game, and had a lot of conversations with catchers over the years, and they get frustrated by your pitch selection. But there was always this conversation that would be, which way do you go? Do you pitch to a hitter's weakness, or do you pitch to your strength? And ultimately, the idea of pitching with confidence, with conviction, is the answer. And it's somewhere in between there, whether it's what you want to do or whether it's what the hitter's not good at. In the case of Chris Sale, he doesn't care. And it's not to say he doesn't care. He understands the information, but he doesn't really care so much what pitch he's putting down. He's developing these relationships with his catchers to the point where there's unbelievable trust. And it's okay, this is what you want. All right, let's do it. And I'm going to give everything I have for 100, 110, 115 pitches a night. That's really impressive. And he obviously has great stuff and nasty stuff. But the fact that he is never overthinking a pitch ever, because he's not. He's not thinking about a pitch at all. He's thinking about, what does the catcher want? Sounds good. Here we go. And I'll give you my best. And we talk about some of the things we saw from him, the greats that do this. He, Max Scherzer, think of Randy Johnson, when they know they're kind of near the end, the way that they can dial it up and dig a little bit deeper and pitch with even more conviction if there's such a thing. So I was amazed when I heard that. And a part of me was a little envious of like, man, you know what? I know I've overthought a lot of stuff in my career, and especially when it came to pitch selection and maybe staying away from something because I didn't think it was the right pitch, or sometimes throwing a pitch but not throwing it with full conviction. He is a perfect example of the way that you get it done. Just to pitch with confidence and aggressiveness doesn't mean you're going to be great all the time, but you're going to put yourself in a really good position to succeed, which he's done throughout his career.
I heard something very interesting, that catchers should get a portion of the pitcher's awards. Is that even a good thought, or like should they get some recognition too, or do they? I mean,
they'll get it from Chris Sale for sure.
Yeah.
It was funny, this conversation that we were having. I can't remember if we were on air or off air when I was doing my radio show, but kind of joking around about, we know when quarterbacks have good years or they win some kind of award, the offensive line, everyone gets a watch or a car or whatever with these guys with all the big money that they make. And should Cy Young Award winners be doing that with their catchers? Now, there's a lot of people involved in what goes on in preparing a pitcher for a game. But I do think, and I'm sure Chris Sale, no doubt, he's a generous guy and a nice guy, takes care of his teammates, but certainly with the catchers, I'm sure he's taking pretty good care of them. So you can't break off a piece of the award. I was in a bullpen one year with Todd Jones when they used to have the Rolaids relief winner, and I was a setup man for him. And the year that he won that Rolaids relief, he had bought everybody in the bullpen kind of these cool little monogrammed pocket watches, which is kind of neat, which I still have. So you do something like that for teammates, because he knows as much as anybody how much of a part of his success they were.
Do you think the analytics help pitchers? Obviously, it helps pitchers, but does it help broadcasters as much as I think it does, or is it too much information on that end as well?
The balance is something I'm always working on, for sure. Yes, there can be a situation where it's too much, and I think there can be times when it's too little. There are some broadcasts that I listen to that I can tell guys that either haven't done their homework or not digging in, or just we have the access but aren't taking advantage of the access to the information that we have. There are some broadcasters that I really like that probably put too much of it in there, and I certainly could be accused of that as well. So we're always working on the balance of, you don't want to leave your longtime older baseball fan behind, but you also want to make sure the newer, younger group that is hungry for analytics, that follows it on their own, that you're also not leaving them out either. That's why I say I don't think you can ever really get 100% approval rating from your fan base. And there's some times where, I probably lean a little bit too heavy on the analytics, but they're very useful. I think the thing, I was having this conversation actually with one of our TV people the other day, is that, sometimes I'll get in a situation where I have a couple of what I feel like really good points. And I really need to stay focused on maybe the best of the group and not worry about trying to get all three. There's times where I go back and watch a lot of the games that I do, and I'm like, oh man, I forced that in there. We didn't need to do that there. I say we, meaning I. A lot of times you can just take the information and you have it to back up your point and just leave it at that without actually using the number. One of the things that I love about Frenchie, the way that he does games, is that he just feels like he's a guy sitting next to you. Obviously, he had a great career and has great experiences, but he's such a guy's guy. And so, as an example, let's just say that we know that Matt Olson has one of the highest exit velocities against four-seam fastballs, right? And I'll the fun way to say it, keeping it simple in baseball terms, is Matt Olson smokes heaters, right? That's like the real kind of fun. And for me, when I run across that, I feel like I almost want to make sure that I'm not making it up. So I want you to have the information to back it up as well. And I might say something like Matt Olson has the second highest exit velocity against four-seam fastballs this year, right? It's the same point, one is using analytics to back it up, and one's talking like a normal person talks, right? So it's trying to find that, because you want to be as relatable as possible, but you also want to know, like, hey, I didn't just make that up. Because I will tell you that there's broadcasts that I'll watch, and I'm like, he made that up. I'm like, that's not accurate. I watched one of the national games that was being done for the Braves, and a guy had made a comment about steal counts and when batters or when runners steal the most, and I was like, that's not accurate, and I knew it wasn't accurate. But I can bring out the numbers to prove that. Obviously, I wasn't doing that broadcast. I almost tweeted about it, and I didn't, because I also take somewhat kind of ownership of our fan base and feel like, hey, I don't want them being misled either about something. If I feel like somebody, especially on a national side, said something wrong about our team, I almost want to correct it for our fans, but I don't want to step on anybody's toes or broadcast either.
I
So
guess
there's a
that's
balance
why
there.
I guess that's why we really don't. We appreciate the national attention, but we really don't like it because you feel like it's one-sided one way or one-sided the other, even though they're not trying to, but it sounds like it.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate how you guys do it both ways, and just the the authenticity you guys have. And I just want to end on this. What were your favorite moments in 2024 as a broadcaster, being a hometown broadcaster for the first time with the Braves?
So from a personal side, just the idea of being home. I've been in the game fortunate to do it for 30 years. Last year, I think, was my 30th year between broadcasting and playing. And I've never worked, whether I was playing or broadcasting, where I actually lived. It was always somewhere else. So to come home at night after work for the first time in my adult life was such a monster blessing in our life. I don't know if I can put into words how amazing that was for me and my family. And then to be able to share what I do more often, like they would come to Texas once in a while, maybe once a year, or meet me on the road once in a while. But to be able to participate as much as they did and come to some games, it was just so fun. I wish I could have started this 10 years ago, but we'll take it, because I never thought this job would be available anyway. So that part of it from a personal side has been amazing. The fan interaction, to me, something that I'll never forget this first year. And I get to still see it every day. Throw something out there. We're talking Braves. I'm like, this fan base is incredible. How much they love the team and just how knowledgeable they are and how passionate they are. But then when we start thinking about during the season, one of the early things that sticks out, silly thing, when I was just kind of getting to know Brandon's broadcast style, is that we were talking about one of those first games in Philly. I can't remember if it was opening day or not. And I don't remember how the conversation started, but something about the Phillies fans were booing the Braves for 6 innings, and then they were booing their bullpen for the final 3 innings. And then Brandon said, and it was Easter, he said they probably would have booed Jesus at the resurrection. That will always stick out to me, because I'm like, he had the courage to say it. I probably wouldn't have the courage to say it, and almost helped me relax a little bit. Like, hey, it's okay. You can say some things once in a while. So as silly as that may sound, that was kind of a defining moment very early in last season, that I was like, oh, this is going to be a lot of fun. And then game 162 was really fun. I kind of lost my emotions there a little bit. And even in game 161, when Ozzie had that big double, and unfortunately the Braves couldn't hold on. But those were really fun moments. And you know what's also silly and dumb is that, so before I took the job, once I knew I had it, I went back and watched a lot of the Braves games from 2023, and I would watch the broadcast and just see how how everybody was working and how they did certain things. And when I would see Frenchie do the Friday Night Showdown, I'd be like, oh man, I wonder if I'm going to be able to do that, because that's fun. And I want to say, like, maybe, I don't know, I could be exaggerating, but it felt like the first month or maybe even first 2 months, I never did it. Like, I wasn't asked to do it. And I was like, all right, I get it. Maybe it's just a Frenchie thing. And that's cool. That's fine. If it's his thing, it's his thing. And then Gretchen, our producer, at one point, said, all right, you're going to have you do the Friday Night Showdown here. And I got so excited. And then just tried to have as much fun as we possibly could with it, as silly as that sounds. And then the last one of the year, I mean, we were so goofy at that point. And the last Friday, I remember, I was like, what am I going to do here? I've been always trying to do, like, deeper, scratchy voice or whatever, try to make it sound like a wrestling thing. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to do my best Michael Buffer here. And like screamed it at the top of my lungs. And the fact that, and it was long and it was exaggerated, but the fact that I was like, okay, I just did that. Am I going to get yelled at? Brandon starts laughing. My producer starts laughing. I'm like, all right, I'm not going to get fired. So little things like that, as much as it is all about what's happened on the field, there were some really fun moments on the field that we got to watch. I think about the broadcasting things that stick out to me, and that's probably the short list.
My favorite things, obviously outside of what you guys do in the game, is the Cracker Jack toss.
Yes.
Are you guys gonna add some new things to it, or who's better at it, do you think?
Well, you know what's a good question because you would assume, oh, CJ Pitch would he be better at throwing Cracker Jacks? Not necessarily. We both love it. It's a cool, fun thing that the Braves provide us with a big box of Cracker Jacks. I always tell Brandon he must be an incredible uncle because he gets great joy out of giving things away to the fans and especially little kids. Like he'll go and get, and I don't know where he gets them from, but there'll be like a couple of full size boxes of M&Ms that he's tossing to kids that are sitting right in the front or somewhere else, and I can see the true joy in his face when it happens. I had brought bagels in one day from a really good bagel place by me, where it's like this old New York bagel style thing. They bring their new water in from New York, and they're really tremendous. But I brought too many, and so we'd even thrown a couple of bagels out that one Sunday, which was really fun. One guy caught one with his glove and then ended up biting it. That will definitely continue. The other thing I did, and I'm sure we'll do this again. I just did this myself. Is that I ordered a bunch of like those little stress balls and just wrote like, thank you fans on there and then put all the people that were in front of the camera's name on it. And I can't remember. I think I got 100 of them. And so we did it for like the last homestand where we maybe threw out 15 or 20 or so. I guess it was probably about 15 each game. And Brandon's like, oh, it was cool. Thanks for doing that. So I think I'll be able to get him on board to maybe do some more stuff like that. But it's so fun to have the interaction. My proud moment with the Cracker Jacks was that I think about who I was as a fan. And as a fan, I sat in the upper deck a lot watching games. And so I actually try to throw them up to get them to the upper deck above us. Like just, people start creeping in, like in the top of the seventh inning, trying to set up what they think is the best position right in front of us. And it's fine. And there'll definitely be a couple thrown there, but I try to get them into the upper deck or I try to see how far I can throw them. And we did an event, an A-lister event. Brandon and I with Ben Ingram, we were talking broadcasting with fans, and a woman stood up and she said, "Hey, CJ, just want to thank you." She goes, "Our seats are right above you guys at the booth, and I've caught Cracker Jacks from you twice." And that was fun for I was like, "Oh, okay, it's been worth it." Because it's not easy to do because it's a tough angle to try, and they don't always make it up there. So that was really fun to get that feedback and to keep doing it. I did one time try to throw them like a frisbee sometimes and really tried to throw one very hard. And I pulled it and it stayed in the booth and hit the RoboCam, which is that little like Snoop cam, and exploded in the booth. And then just went Cracker Jack went everywhere. Thankfully, I didn't hit Brandon or Hal, our stats guy who was right there. That could have been disastrous. So there's been some
Brandon hit
moments.
somebody with a water bottle, didn't he?
He tossed one like nice and easy, and the person just missed it, and so you panic a little bit and you worry about that. But it is such a fun thing to do, and of course, like you can't just be normal and just throw them to the people in front of us. We always try to do something different, and have a little bit of fun. But I'm glad the Braves allow us to do that.
The last thing I promise is, what are your expectations for the Braves in 2025? I know nothing has really happened off-season wise, but are there some things you're looking at?
Yeah, so I'd say obviously we're going to see some transactions, right? They cleared a pretty decent amount of money with the Jorge Soler trade, and unfortunately with Travis d'Arnaud not coming back, restructuring the contracts of a couple of guys, and Aaron Bummer and Ronaldo Lopez gave them a little bit more financial flexibility for this year. That number is probably somewhere around $30 million, and who knows where payroll is going to end up. Alex told me one time, he's like, I know you guys see a lot of numbers on the internet. He's like, when it comes to the payroll, they're not accurate. They're close, but they're not accurate. So that's other always got to take that with a grain of salt as far as what is out there. They're going to do something. There's no two ways about it. I think they'll likely add a starting pitcher. Now that we know that Spencer and Ronald are not going to be ready to start the season, I do think a starting pitcher is going to be very important and a veteran type. I really like the name of Aldi. Nate Eovaldi, I was with him in Texas. He seems like he'd be the perfect fit. I know Walker Buehler's name has come up as well. The thing that's fun about this organization is that there's going to be something that none of us were anticipating. I had somebody ask me on radio, all right, what's the move going to be, CJ? What's AA going to do that nobody saw coming? I'm like, I don't know. That's what it is. We never see it coming. Is there another Chris Sale out there? Probably not. Turned out to be an amazing story, but quite honestly, him and Ronaldo Lopez both. Nobody, I think, saw that level of success coming in the rotation. So I think they're going to try to pull that off somehow, some way again, or maybe it's just an established guy like Eovaldi. I think the thing that's going to be important for the season is how long Spencer and Ronald are out. Right? AA told us that they're not going to be there to start the season. But how far does it go? That's a big one, right? Obviously, we really missed Spencer and Ronald last year. And so the quicker they get back, the better. But this team's going to be in a great position to win again. It was unfair to ask them to repeat what they did in 23 and 24 offensively. Even if everyone stayed healthy, it was not going to happen. That was an historic season. They're really hard to repeat. Hopefully, Juan Soto keeps out of the National League East. I know the Mets are going to be spending a lot of money. They're going to be very interesting. They actually, their payroll's down right now. They have big money to spend. They make me nervous, and the Phillies will be good. So it's going to be a competitive division once again. We're not going to be able to get away from that, but the Braves are going to be right in it. So I'm excited to see how the offseason goes. But either way, this is going to be a really, really good team again.
AA is the worst GM to be a content creator because you're trying to do speculation videos. You can't speculate anything with Alex Anthopoulos, and I think that's the most entertaining / nerve-wracking thing as a Braves fan that I've learned quickly. But thank you so much. I know we covered a bunch of topics and just went tennis back and forth, but you're so amazing. Thank you for so much of the support, and as always, go Braves, champions forever, and can't wait to talk to you throughout the season and continue.
Well, thank you, Cassidy. It was my pleasure. I got a little envious. I saw when you had your interview with Darren O'Day, and I said, I hope she's going to send me a note soon and ask me to come on because you do a great job. And like I said, I'm not just saying that. I absolutely love your passion for this team, good, bad, or indifferent. Your collection of glasses is amazing as well. And so I appreciate everything you do. And it was my honor to be here with you.